The Leopold Institute is this sort of strange little research unit that's actually within the Rocky Mountain Research Station. But we have a national mission to do wilderness relevant science. Science that will help with the stewardship of wilderness. And another part of what we do regarding wilderness science is using wilderness as a natural laboratory, which we've heard a little bit about, because we don't really have we have a lot less human interference in wilderness. So we can actually see how natural processes like fire operate. So what I'm going to try to do today is just really distill down just a couple of key things, set up the speakers that will follow, the scientists that will follow, who will share some of their research and insights. I have attempted to do this as after the 50th celebration, which was 2 years ago, to sort of look at the body of literature in general and try to summarize what progress we've seen in wilderness fire science. And so I looked all through what my colleagues, who don't necessarily work on wilderness fire science, but they have a lot of research that actually speaks to wilderness fire. And so I tried to summarize that. As an outcome of the 50th, we actually have a special issue of the Journal of Forestry that's just dedicated to wilderness science in general. And there's a review article in there with a lot of references and sort of like my interpretation, along with Greg Applett, who was my co-author, on what that means for wilderness. So I have a single hard copy in the back of the tent, and you can take a look at that. It's also available online, and anybody with the Forest Service has access to that material online. And so anyway, so I'm going to distill down, only present a real small subset of what I summarized in that article. Oh, okay. Yeah, but now I have to know how to use this. Okay. Okay, so wilderness science is a little different than science in general because wilderness is different. The 1964 Act directs us to manage that land differently than we manage other lands. It asks us to operate with restraint and to not intervene, at least when we don't have to. So the bar is really high in wilderness. From a manager's perspective, they really want to know, whether, when, and how they need to intervene. So do they even need to intervene at all? Can they just let natural processes operate? When are they, justified in intervening in order to avoid further deterioration of the wilderness resource? And then if they are intervening, then how do they do it? And they're directed to use the minimum impact, to use the minimum tool for the job. So that's how we get to the way that we've been hearing of how wilderness fires are managed, with a light hand and letting them burn. So wilderness fire, yes, lots of terminology. It changes all the time. I actually don't get too hung up on the terminology because it's exhausting. We just know what we mean, right? We mean a fire where we're intentionally allowing it to burn primarily on its own terms. Yes, we might tuck in an end of that fire. We might throw some water at it to cool it down or moderate its spread. But we're doing this, and we're letting fire visit the landscape on its own terms primarily in order to get the benefit of that process to the landscape. So it has all these terms, and I think, take your pick, but just make sure you let people know what you mean. So, as you've heard, we had this policy change, or that was spearheaded, the Prescribed Natural Fire program that started, and we've seen this, what I call sort of this fire management experiment, which has taught us a lot. This fire management experiment taking place across the country, but primarily in some key places. These are the ones that I'm most familiar with, and that we see most of the information in the literature from. So we have the national parks in the Sierra Nevada. We have the Gila, Aldo, Leopold Wilderness and Saguaro National Park in the Southwest. And we have the Northern Rockies, which is a great success story, and great, there's a wealth of information that's been produced from this this experiment that's been going on, where managers have been allowing fire to visit the landscape. So we can look at how fire in general, national statistics of area burned as we've gone through since the Wilderness Act, different policy changes and language changes. And so this is all fires, wildfire, unwanted wildfire, suppression fires, and our prescribed natural fire program. And you can't even see the number of acres in green here, because it's, an order of magnitude less than the total fire area burned. But when we blow it up and we actually look at it, we have seen the growth of this program since 1972. We've seen acres burned increase. Now, I was only able to chart this to 2009, because after that we dropped the sharp distinction between good fire and bad fire, or between suppression fire and wildland fire use. And so I did not attempt to chart those numbers, but we've seen, rapid increase, okay? So thanks to the people in this room in part.
Carol, before you go on, just because the slides may be harder for people to see in the back, if you could just point to what those green bars are showing there on the right, just to make sure everyone's, because I can see the axes, but I'm not sure everyone can. Okay,
so it's the year on the bottom is from 1960 all the way to 2010 here. And the axes go from 0 to 500,000 acres. So this is just showing the annual area burned by these wilderness fires, these wildland fire use, prescribed natural fire, the stuff we're talking about. So what have we learned? What do we know? Well, we actually have learned from looking at these fires and the studies that have examined them and their effects, is that fire does appear to be self-limiting on the landscape. We have evidence of that, and it's growing in multiple places. So that evidence is mounting. It's kind of undeniable. So that means that when fires occur on the landscape and subsequent fires occur, they bump into those fires. Those earlier fires have a moderating effect on subsequent fires. There's only so much fuel out there, right? And it gets chunked away at periodically, and you get that wonderful mosaic that you're seeing on that Bob Marshall map. We've seen that, specifically some studies in the Bob Marshall complex, Lear, Phelan, and Keene, they were concerned when they had seen some effects of fires that appeared to really threaten the large ponderosa pine. And somebody can help me out with where this was.
White River Park? White River Park?
What's that?
White River Park.
White River Park? Okay. They're really concerned. They're like, wow, these large ponderosa pines have really taken a hit. We think they're not doing really well. We think they're going to die. Well, Bob Keene and his colleague, Signe, they went back out 10 years later to see how those trees were doing. And remarkably, those trees were, they were really surprised that there was far less mortality than it seemed immediately post-fire, that these trees had the capacity to actually withstand these fairly severe fires that had occurred. And then Andrew will be talking more about this, I hope, but has this great paper. It was actually an award-winning paper, where he actually, pretty compelling story that the landscape, that the forests actually, we can restore the natural process of fire to these forests without too much adverse effect, that there's a latent resilience in these forests, even after a long period of fire exclusion. But he also really brings up the point that we really need that second fire to clean up after that first fire, that's really important to the species composition that's there later. And he can correct me and embellish later on that. And then we've seen, like I said, this, so much increasing evidence that, and Sean's going to tell you a little bit more about that when fires interact. And we kind of all knew this intuitively, I think. You've seen it anecdotally out there. If you work fires, you know that, fires drop down when they get into a previously burned area. Well, Sean's done some great work to actually quantify when that happens, how long that effect lasts, and under what weather conditions that effect lasts. We've also learned from this experiment some stuff about social science. We've learned that, the public, we worry about public support constraining the fire program. But we actually have some work by Katie Notek, who's here, who looked at, wilderness visitors, looking at surveys that have been done over time, and looking at how they responded to questions about fire. And it looks like there's a trending increase support for fire. And that probably has a lot to do with the public the visitors actually being able to see the effects of fire over time when they visit the wilderness, and maybe even up close and personal encounters with fire in the wilderness when areas are not closed during fire. So I think that's a really encouraging piece of work where you can kind of look at it and see, wow, the public might be on board, and that we can garner their support.
And that was done in the Bob.
And one of those study areas was in the Bob, yeah. So, and then we've also had some studies of what happens internally. So, Dave and George were talking about the getting beat up internally and externally at the same time. So there have been some studies that have tried to look at that, and one in particular was focused on district rangers, wilderness district rangers in Region 1 and Region 4. And after interviewing these wilderness rangers about their ability to make the go, no-go decision on wilderness fire, what really fell out, everybody had a variety of obstacles of from public support to staffing to things that Deb and Mike were talking about, liability, budget. Everybody had those obstacles, those barriers, but one of the key, attributes of individuals who are actually making the decision to manage fires was really boiled down to their personal commitment to seeing that fire on the landscape, to knowing that that fire belongs on the landscape and making a difference there. So it was that personal commitment, that personal passion, the belief that fire needs to be on the land. It really boiled down to that. And so, that tells me that, wow, Wilderness Fire Program can really hinge on a single individual or single staff. And it also requires that constant commitment to see it through time. And then you're also going to be hearing from Phil Higuera, who's going to talk about what might the opportunities or be in the future given climate change. We have, growing evidence that there are trends in increasing season length, increasing fire season length. You can kind of feel it, but there's some quantitative information about that. Seasons are occurring earlier, they're lasting longer. What does that mean for managing the Wilderness Fire Program? Is it going to be more challenging? And then top that off with compounding disturbances. We have a lot more insect disturbance out there than we've seen before. That's related to climate as well. We have fire and insect disturbances interacting on the landscape, and there's actually, that's a huge field of study that probably we need to do a lot more work in. And then we have, more and more people actually moving in to around our wilderness areas, and how is that going to impact our ability to implement the Wilderness Fire Program? And people that might not be familiar with fire, so it kind of gets back to that fire education. So, so I think, so scientifically, we've learned a lot about fire as a natural landscape process. We've learned some about how people respond to that fire as a natural landscape process. And it's basically, there's a whole lot of heterogeneity out there that provides us with a lot of opportunity, and it's really that heterogeneity is what it's all about with wilderness fire. We don't know how that fire is going to burn. We don't know how long it's going to burn. It's going to have a variety of effects out there, and that's what makes the magic, though. And so I'm just going to leave it at that.
So we do have a couple minutes for questions or comments. We do have them.
So Carol, you said that you don't get hung up on terminology because it's so exhausting. I totally understand that. But personally, I'm disappointed that we no longer have differentiation between the fire use term or PNF term and the non-PNF term, because, for example, your graph can never be completed, and it's hard for us as fire managers to continue to make the case for how well our program is doing, because now everything's just washed into one category, and I find that really frustrating, and I wonder what your take is on that.
Well, originally when that change was coming down, I was actually I was very optimistic about it, because I thought, okay, maybe this will actually result in more fire on the landscape. Maybe not, that people could maybe backdoor some fire that they might not have the courage or confidence to manage as, hello, I'm letting fire burn. And so I kind of, from my sort of ecologist standpoint, I kind of didn't care. It's like, okay, well, just as long as the fire is being returned to the landscape. But I knew it would be really hard to track our progress and our accountability. And so I've never liked that. It's super hard to be accountable now, right? We don't really know what we're doing. So, yeah, I don't know.
If I could add to that just a little bit, I think that from a different perspective, from the land manager's perspective or fire managers, that the acres you had up there that are only talking about get fires is actually not actually that accurate to start with. Because we've got a lot of fires that, where I said that initial decision may be a no-go.
Yep.
We're going to try to suppress it. But then as the fire continues to grow, and I'll talk a little bit about a fire we had in 2007 that Norm had helped us manage. It was a suppression fire, the Rayleigh Mountain Fire, 2007, went 22,000 acres. We never put a person on it except to protect some cabins. Because we didn't call it a good fire, none of those acres show up in any of your numbers. What we're doing now, though, is because we've got that opportunity to claim to do, have a fire that we have suppression side and resource benefit side. We're able to work that. What we're missing, and exactly what you guys are talking about, is that really accurate way to figure how that's going to, how do we find those numbers? Because I don't really think the numbers we had beforehand were actually that accurate. And I'm not sure, and right now I know we're not getting good numbers. And so where is that? And Frankie's going to figure that out.
It was an artificial,
I got a slide, I'll tell you.
All right.
it was an artificial dichotomy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, I mean,